Hello, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We just wanted to wait a few minutes to allow some other participants to join us. Welcome, firstly. Welcome to our Postgraduate Education Conference. It's hosted by the Faculty of Medicine PG Education team. My name is Dallas Alexandru. I'm the Operations Manager for the PG Education team, and I'm co-hosting this first session together with Katie Stripe, also from our PG Education team. We're very much in the same situation as many of you now find yourselves in as you prepare for the upcoming academic year, in that this is our first online conference. There has, as you would expect, been much preparation, and we think we've planned for most scenarios, but I would ask for your patience if we experience any technical challenges. Before we begin in earnest, there are a few housekeeping issues that I do need to cover. Next slide, please, Katie. Thank you. The first thing to say is this session is being recorded, and this recording, plus those from the future sessions, will be made available after the conference's second day, and that's on Tuesday of next week. It's appreciated that MS Teams live events is likely to be a platform that many of you may not be familiar with. It's more of a broadcast platform than one that enables two-way communication, but to err on the side of caution, could I ask you all to please ensure that your microphones are switched off? As you listen to the presenters today, if you'd like to ask any questions, we'd of course welcome them, but these can only be posted through the Q&A facility. You'll see the icon on your screen. It's a small question mark that sits in the image of a page, and you should see it in the top right-hand side of your screen. Each presenter will look at any questions posted after their talk, and of course, if possible, will respond. But where there isn't time or where it's not possible, our presenters today have kindly said that they will also follow up with any unanswered questions. So we will get back to all of you. But also, if you're able to join us just after 4 o'clock today, 5 minutes past 4 to be exact, that's when we're holding what we're calling our online conference cafe, and you're all very welcome. It's being held in the standard MS Teams format, so offers another opportunity for you to pose questions, and you can either do that in the more familiar way now, either by raising your hand or by speaking through the chat function. Thank you, Katie. I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes on the full conference, not just this session, but on our entire conference as a whole. The background to which was that it was raising awareness that preparations for online learning have brought into focus even more sharply the question of inclusion. And many of us, that's staff and students, might have had a sense of feeling locked out of our traditional environments, whether that's our classrooms, labs, or broader intellectual communities. So this conference has been designed to be a space for surfacing this issue, and particularly the way it appears at different stages of staff and student journeys. So that might be through course design, the experience of teaching and learning, and the development of our academic identities. The second session this afternoon, the one that follows straight after from this one, no, can you still go back for a second, Katie, please? Explores managing expectations, gaining student buy-in, and preparing our students in an inclusive way as they transition into their postgrad studies. On the second day of the conference, the first session explores adjusting to the online and blended teaching environments, the challenges that this brings for both staff and students, and explores how as educators we manage that environment with both confidence and resilience. And then the second session on Tuesday will focus on the importance of the creation of both individual academic identities and how the formation of these involves the wider learning community. The session will look at the elements that can be embedded within our online classrooms and academic communities to enable this process of identity development. At the end of the session today, there is a little bit more information on those remaining sessions and on our conference cafe, but our session now is what I'd like to focus on. Thank you, Katie. So this session is entitled PLAN, which stands for Prepare Learning for All Needs. And our focus is on why taking account of every single student and every single teaching colleague when planning our programmes simply can't be ignored. And I'm really pleased to say that to surface issues related to this, you'll hear insightful personal narratives from 4 Imperial colleagues, which will hopefully stimulate your approach to considering and supporting every student and every colleague as you work with your teams to plan your online and blended delivery. This group of presentations has been themed as MEET, M-E-E-T, and that stands for My Experience in Education and Teaching, and hopefully that gives you a flavour of what you're about to hear. First, you'll hear from Sarah Rankin from our National Heart and Lung Institute. Then Sarah Asilfi-Quay from our Faculty of Medicine Centre, working for the Research Strategy team. Alejandro Luis will then speak, and Alejandro is from our Centre for HE Research and Scholarship. And finally, from Katie Stripe from our own PG Education team. So, without further delay, I would like to invite Sarah to present. I would just finally say that if you'd like to ask any questions, as I said, you have to use the Q&A facility, that there will be a delay, both because our presenters will only look after they've finished their presentations, but also because there is an inbuilt moderation process. But where we can, we will answer. And as I said, you're more than welcome to join us in our conference cafe. Over to Sarah. Sarah, I think you're muted.
Me. Right, sorry everybody. I'm going to be talking about neurodiversity in STEM in the context, obviously, of postgraduate education. So first of all, moving on, what is neurodiversity? Next slide, please. So neurodiversity is obviously a neurological condition. There is clearly a genetic component because it runs in families. It's an umbrella term, and it covers a range of frequently co-occurring, and that's important, conditions. These include dyslexia, dyspraxia, also known as developmental coordination disorder, ADHD, and autism. These terms are often, or there are other terms to neurodiversity. So in the Disability Advisory Centre at Imperial, in Advisory Service, I should say, these things are referred to as specific learning disabilities, or SPLDs. The term neurodiversity has really come from people like myself that have the sort of lived experience of having an SPLD, and I'll move on to that in a bit. So if we think about dyslexia, and if I say dyslexia to you, I'm sure everybody who's listening will think about people that are slow at reading or find reading and writing a difficulty, bad at spelling. And you can see how that is going to impact somebody, particularly in primary school. And somebody like myself in primary school, who was both dyslexic and dyspraxic, was very frustrated and humiliated because I found it difficult to express myself, both verbally and on paper. But now we're thinking about master's students. Now, master's students, if they're coming to Imperial, they're clearly intelligent, they clearly learnt to read and write. So what's the issue in terms of postgraduate education and having a learning disability. And I think the really important thing, first of all, is that I am testament to the fact that you do not grow out of these things. You learn to sort of cope with them, you get around, you find ways of getting around, but you do not grow out of them. And also because what you do changes, so the way you are learning, your assessments, the way you are being assessed at master's level changes quite dramatically. You come across new challenges as you go through your education and indeed your career. So I think that's really important to think this is not just something that occurs in school kids and just requires extra time in exams. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the challenges that one faces if one has a specific learning difference. So, as I said, dyslexia, difficulties with literacy, word finding, speech problems, dyspraxia. So we think of dyspraxia in little kids not being able to catch a ball, problems with coordination, balance, you know, difficulties learning to ride a bike and things like that. When you're an adult, dropping, usually knocking over your wine, things like that. But how does dyspraxia impact you in terms of your learning? I had no clue until I started to research this, and then it all became very apparent. Because if you are dyspraxic, you are somebody whose thought process looks like a spider diagram rather than a nice linear sequential series of events. And because of that, you have problems with planning things in your head. So planning a long extended essay is going to be incredibly challenging for you. Likewise with dyslexia, writing is problematic. And if you've got to write an extended thing like a thesis or a mini thesis, that can be a huge problem. And there are people that avoid doing masters and definitely PhDs just because of the amount of writing involved. And I've talked to people that have been really successful senior scientists within industry, so like GSK, AstraZeneca, because they left academia to avoid doing a PhD because they couldn't face the writing process. ADHD, again, these are kids, hyperactive kids we think of boys not being able to concentrate and always being on the move. This is really interesting. So in terms of the science, because actually there's a gender difference. So we think, are there more boys that have ADHD? This is in fact incorrect, because just girls have a different manifestation. So, and adult females, it's very difficult for you to actually tell that that person has ADHD if you're thinking about looking for somebody that is obviously hyperactive. Actually, what they have is a hyperactive brain rather than being physically hyperactive. So there are gender differences in how these neurodiversities manifest in people, and that's really important to bear in mind. Same thing with autism. You've probably seen on the news lots more girls being diagnosed with autism, and the great thing here is that basically what girls have been doing, intelligent girls have been doing, is masking. So if you smile, oh, I smile, and so that people don't actually tell that they are autistic. So there are lots of problems. If we look in the centre, we can see that people with neurodiversity have in common difficulties with organisation, and that includes time management, really time management, memory, time, direction, sequencing, poor listening skills leading to frustration. And so these students, you know, they will have challenges in learning, and that can manifest. And when I was senior tutor for the medical students, I was seeing students coming to me with depression, and the depression was because they were failing at some of their assessments. They couldn't understand how they'd been really great at doing short answer questions, multiple choice. When it came to doing long essay questions, they suddenly found that they were failing. They didn't have the right skill set, and they didn't know, actually some of them weren't even diagnosed. Moving on. So it's a challenge in many ways. However, there are people that are successful despite being neurodiverse. Moving on. So, and this is the bit that I really like, and this is sort of come up sort of really in the last sort of 10 years. This has become very popular and people are doing lots of research and thinking about this. And this is the fact that if you are neurodiverse, yes, you have these challenges, but you also have strengths. And your strengths in particular are things like creativity, non-linear thinking, thinking outside of the box. You're going to be somebody that's incredibly innovative. These are the people we want as scientists. So, you know, they can make really good scientists as well. So moving on. If we were looking at somebody like myself, this would how you can sort of diagnose somebody, or we can't, but educational psychologists diagnose somebody. They give you all these tests to do, and they basically say, yep, you're rubbish at reading, you're rubbish at time management, but you're really great at problem solving, coming up with ideas, linking disparate ideas, etc., etc. So you have what's called a spiky profile. And so we need to think about this. So if we're going to teach somebody like this, then what is it we need to do? Next slide, please. So this is an education innovation project that I developed and have been doing with David Mooney in the Disability Advisory Service and Katie Polito, who I'm sure most of you know. And what we have been doing is thinking about actually what are we going to do to address this problem. And what we have been doing is raising staff awareness. So even a talk like this, trying to introduce people to the idea that actually we need to change the way we teach for these students, because they will comprise at least 10% of your cohort of students. I'm going to talk about assistive technologies in a second, but things like making teaching materials accessible, which is actually now part of law. So all teaching materials, anything that is on the web now, has to be in an accessible format for example, people with dyslexia. That means a non-serif font, it means having a slightly off-white background, etc., etc. How are you going to be able to do this or know what to do? So we have been putting things in place. We have just developed an e-resource. It's a very short e-resource, but it's the sort of 101 guide to neurodiversity and what you need to do to make sure you are sort of making your program accessible for these students. And things that we have done, then Kate and myself both are involved in running master's courses, and we have both also in the resources for on that e-resource, we have put what we have done with our master's courses to make them more accessible. Moving on. Assistive technology, the college invested $250,000 in assistive technology. It's available for all students and all staff. So this is really inclusive. Some of the things are really good, you know, so SpellX is something that you want if you're dyslexic, but also if you're an international student, it's great. Likewise, Grammarly. Sonocent is a great audio note taker. But interesting how we're not really sure how useful is that going to be now we're on this sort of remote format. If we go on, next slide. Mind mapping software is a great thing. As I mentioned, I think as a spider diagram, and so this is how I like to think about things. I don't think of things in a linear way, and doing mind mapping allows you to put all your ideas down in a sort of spider diagram. Then at a click of a button, it will convert it into a document. So if we next slide. So for example, one of the things that we get our students to do, So we sort of give them the challenge of learning how to use this software and then using it to put all their projects into. So they have their projects, can you put everything in, you can add as many figures or the methods, and it's quite a good way. We then say, okay, if you're going to discuss with your supervisor, take your laptop along, show them the thing, and you can look at each section. And this is a way of getting them used to using this software. And also because one of the barriers is always students saying they don't have time to do it. Right, next slide. So the idea is that we don't really think of these learning differences. They're differences, the difference in the way we process information, and in a non-inclusive environment they become disabilities. And the most obvious non-inclusive environment is a school environment where these kids really struggle. A university does not have to be, and a work environment does not have to be. It should be an inclusive environment, and then these people can start working to their full potential. Thank you. I think that's my last slide. No, last slide. Just to say, we've set up ND in Albertopolis. This is a staff student network. It's going to be great. We've had a couple of meetings. We are having one on the 21st of October, which will really be one of my students, one of the medical students that I was working on this, did some research with for our project. It's going to be talking about his dyspraxic journey. And yeah, we have students from all these other institutions. Great collaboration. Next slide. And just to say, what can you do? There's the e-learning resource, which will come out soon. I'm going to create a 10-minute pre-recorded webinar, a bit like this, to talk about neurodiversity, to try and reduce the stigma of it and try and get students thinking to go and engage with the Disability Advisory Service, because they do fantastic one-on-one study skills. And then in terms of remote teaching, well, we don't really know. This is a new area, and there's not much that I've found out to asking people about what we need to do for these students. So we need to ask them, basically. Finish.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sarah. And I've seen that we've already had a few questions, so please keep them coming. Sarah will do her best to answer them. I'd now like to pass over to Sarah Asilfi-Quay, who's going to talk about representation matters, why I'm not a black female academic at Imperial. Sarah.
Hi. So, these presentations are collectively themed as MEET, my experience in education and teaching. But you got me at an interesting time in our lives. Pre-Black Lives Matter movement, I probably wouldn't have gone with such a strong title. I would have eased you in a bit first. But Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. So here we are. So next slide, please. First, let me tell you a little bit about me and my history. So my parents came from Ghana to the motherland, where the streets are paved with gold. They trained as nurses, and when they tried to rent accommodation, they were told, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So up at the top is me and my siblings outside our house in Hull. So yes, I'm a secret northerner, and there are some tiny clues when I say certain words. So misunderstandings started when I was very young. For example, makeup doesn't work on you. Go over there by yourself and use the chalk. That was my teacher when I was 4 years old before a nativity play. I also remember things like getting a brick through the window and one of my brothers needing to change schools because of bad treatment. So we moved to London a year or so later. So again, at the top, that's me at primary school. So my siblings and I were one of 2 black families at the school. And I had to deal with frequent racist abuse and was regularly called the N-word, D-word, P-word, which I can let you know in the cafe later this afternoon if you're wondering what some of these are. So I was often surprised at my intelligence, and I sometimes felt like I wasn't supported as much as some of my classmates. Also, it was not infrequent that family members were stopped and searched by the police. So my history at Imperial. I've been at Imperial since 2002. I started in the labs as a research technician before moving into a research role, whilst I was also conducting a part-time PhD. So as it turns out, there's no such thing as a part-time PhD, but there's no time to go into that now. In my first couple of years, I was the only black female in the department. And then 2 years in, people started getting my name wrong. And turns out it's because we had a new PhD student that had started. She was also a black female. She was from Nigeria and she was about 8 inches taller than me, but everyone would constantly confuse us. So I think this is now classed as my preference. When my contract was ending, to decide if I was going to pursue academia, and because we our stats, I did a quick search on how the answer was 0. So instead, I decided to change my career path towards university. 2 things I should have noted. Even now, a decade later, there were only 35 black female professors in the whole of the UK. And the second thing I wrote down, because I remember reading an article earlier in the year, that black females make up only XX% of senior university leadership roles. So when I found that report, the figure I should have written was black females make up 0% of senior university leadership roles. Like, again, that's for the whole of the UK. So I probably should have thought more carefully about moving into administration. What I needed was an environment where I felt I would be supported and encouraged to pursue and thrive while striving to achieve at the top levels in my field. And then there's extra few pictures that I have on the slide. So in the top left-hand corner where I'm playing hockey, again, it's another aspect in my life where I'm often the only black person on the field. I went to trial for the Masters England hockey team. And again, I turned up, there's about 50 or 60 people. I'm the only black person there. It made me question whether I should really be in that space. But because I was there, I was invited along to South England trials. And I ended up being picked for the squad, and we managed to place and get a medal in the tournament. But from my background, is it just to show where my heritage still comes in, you can see the message from my sister. We came in second, and as she wrote, second is first place for losers, of which she still stands by that statement. And I also have this picture here with my mum and sister at a Ghanaian Nurses Association ball last year. And I put that there because throughout my childhood, I very much tried to run away from my heritage and my background because I wanted to just fit in and not be so different, to try and not have to deal with what seemed to be a different life than my other classmates. And now I feel like I'm at the point where I'm more proud of my heritage, which I'm enjoying. Next slide, please. What am I doing about the lack of representation at Imperial? And right on cue, I have interruption. Downstairs. Downstairs. Sorry. So my main role is currently a project manager in research strategy. However, I'm also the project director for the Faculty of Medicine Culture Initiatives Management Group, co-chair for Imperial is One, which is the college's Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Staff Network, and I sit on the self-assessment team for the Race Equality Charter. With these different roles, I've been challenging the establishment from different angles. I'm helping to create a sense of belonging at Imperial with initiatives and events for our Imperial as One community. We organised this Monday conference for BME early career researchers from across the UK. The aim of the conference was for attendees to come away feeling equipped with new knowledge on how to navigate the academic space and a boost to their networks. This is in order to help them make the decision to stay in academia. So during this event in the top right-hand corner, that was in 2018, Black Scientists and Inventions, I found out what the Imperial motto was. And when I had an opportunity to speak at the Hod's lunch last September, it was one of the things I brought up at Imperial as an organisation to think about acknowledging or changing. I took part in a diverse-a-thon held at the Francis Crick Institute, and I was so inspired, which is not hard when Jess Wade is one of the leading voices, that we organised one at Imperial, and then there have been many more that have been held here since. I was also part of the team that organised a widening participation event to encourage students from a BAME background to think about continuing on to PhD, and we believe this is the first at the college for that. So the data is very stark in some areas, but as Nelson Mandela said, and it's one of my favourite quotes, it always seems impossible until it's done. And after summarising just some of my efforts that I've been making, just in the bottom corner, I think it's very appropriate. I feel like I'm already tired tomorrow. Next slide, please. So, what are you going to do about the lack of representation? You can think about decolonising the curriculum, or as my co-chair Wayne says, It's more about repopulating the curriculum, making sure you're adding the missing stories to make sure you teach a fuller picture of science and learning. You can check your bias. So when you're decision making, hiring, marking assignments, make sure that you've got an open mind and thinking about possible biases that be creeping into your decisions. Remember that representation matters. So what does your student cohort look like? Should there be things like ring fence places for your underrepresented groups? Is the makeup of your staff the same as and as diverse as your student cohort? Are the management and decision-making bodies diverse and inclusive? Next slide, please. So you can start, this is just to start some homework that you can go away with now. There's a great TED talk by Janet Stovall, How to Get Serious About Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace. EDIC have created a great resource on their web pages, How to Be a White Ally. Retention, it's a short film which addresses the topic of institutional racism and the gap in student retention. And last week, there was Pint of Science, Skin Society and Science. Deshane's opening statement was powerful to me. He's a PhD student from Imperial. It's not because of what he said, because I'm living the life of a Black person, so I know the stats even if I don't know all the numbers. It's because it feels like we're in a moment where Black people can finally speak our truths, and also maybe it feels like people might listen and act this time around. So we'll see. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that incredibly personal account, but also coupled with some really useful tips and guidance on what all of us can do now to look into that matter more in terms of representation. I'd now like to introduce Alejandro, who's going to speak to us about issues associated with the optical condition of colour blindness.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Just checking. Yes? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, both Sarahs, for amazing and eye-opening presentations. You've certainly given me a lot to think about. I'm feeling quite self-conscious now that I've used the Imperial template, which happens to be a white background. I won't do the same next time, but it's yeah, interesting to see how there are lots of things that we can do to address things and make the life of other people easier. But yeah, so I'll just jump straight into my presentation. I'm going to talk to you about being colorblind today. As you can see from the title of my presentation, it has indeed impacted my life at Imperial as well as other aspects of my life. So yep, Katie, if you could go on. So just so you know who is talking to you, I'm a Canadian Peruvian. I've lived in these 5 countries throughout my upbringing. I had quite an international upbringing due to my parents' employment, and I ended up in the UK to study at Imperial. I did mechanical engineering. After that, I became a researcher in the Centre for Higher Education Research and Scholarship, where I am researching into sense of belonging. And I have something called protanomaly, which is a type of red-green color blindness. If you could go forward. So 2 circles with dots. I'm not sure if you've seen these before. These are called Ishihara color blindness test plates. The one on the left has a number in it. Most of you will probably be able to see what number it is. I can't see it. All I see is a circle made of dots. I can't even see the outlines of the numbers. I literally just see dots. On the right is another type of plate that I can see a 2 quite clearly, and due to my colorblindness. And if you can see the 2, it may be that you're colorblind, but it's not invisible to people with normal vision or unimpaired vision. But this is just to illustrate that it's something that I experience all the time, and indeed I'm experiencing right now, even as I look at the screen. So if you could move on, Kitty. So this is just to further illustrate the point. I see on the right what you see when, I see on the left what you see when you look at the right. So I can't see the numbers on the left other than 25 and 56 in the 2nd and 4th circles. Other than that, they're all just circles to me, made of dots. So That's just to illustrate that, as I said, that's what it's like. Katie, next slide, please. So just quickly jumping into the science, I won't spend too long on this, but essentially we have three photosensitive cells in our eyes, or three types, the long, medium, and short wavelengths. And what I have is a deficiency in my long wavelength cones, which, long story short, means that I see less red in every, I just in general see less of the red wavelength. So that doesn't just affect colors with red, it affects colors that possess or contain any type of red. So for example, purple. And there's lots of science behind this. It's all very fascinating. I would encourage you to look into it and read it, or read about it to find out more. But the diagram on the right is just meant to illustrate that there are many types of color blindness, ranging from deuteranomaly, which is the most common one, all the way down to achromatopsia or monochromacy, where you see the world in black and white, or in grayscale, essentially. So moving on. So the stats are that 1 in 12 men, so approximately 8% of men, have a form of color blindness, and 1 in 200 women have a form of color blindness. And this is due to, or the massive difference is due to the fact that the color blindness is carried in the X chromosome. And for women, it has to be present in both of their X chromosomes, whereas for men, they only have one X chromosome, and if it's there, then they are colorblind. So it's much more prevalent in women. And what this means, in men, and what this means is that assuming 1/3 women or 2/3 men in our population at Imperial, and assuming that the population at Imperial is roughly representative of the world's population, Katie, if you could go on, that means out of our 18,000 students at Imperial, it is likely that over 1,000 are colorblind. And this means that many of you as educators, if you've taught a cohort of 100, it's quite likely that you have taught people who are colorblind, and statistically you're likely to have up to or in and around 5 people out of a cohort of 100. So it's quite common, and is certainly something to think about. Next slide, please. So this is to illustrate what it's really like. The circles with dots kind of don't really spell out the whole picture. So I see the protanopia column, so the third column, when I look at a traffic light, or I see what you see when I look at a traffic light. And this is just kind of to illustrate that it is quite severe and it can have quite serious consequences. And as I'll explain later, very much as Sarah mentioned, you learn as someone with colorblindness how to get around and navigate the world in a way that is obviously safe and kind of unimpedes or doesn't impede your day-to-day activities. So for example, I use the positionality of the lights more than I use the actual color. And that's how I can justify getting into the driving seat of a car. So if you move on to the next one. I'm told by my wife that there's a massive difference in these two photos. When I showed it to her, she was pretty shocked. I see on the right, again, what you see, it's confusing. I see on the right what I see on the right what you see on the left. When I look at the thing on the left, I see on the right. My apologies. It's very warm in this room. So there's kind of an aspect of I don't know the difference. I don't really live my life hoping or wishing that I saw in full color, because to me, it's only when I look at these kinds of images that I can kind of see that maybe I would see life in slightly more color if I wasn't colorblind, but for the most part, I can't tell. It only kind of comes out or is a problem in certain cases. So if you go to the next slide, this is a kind of illustration of where it can become a problem. So right away from just a minor inconvenience, such as people asking, what color is this? And they hold up a red sweater, or coloring in an apple, which is actually how my parents find out that I was diagnosed. I colored an apple brown instead of red. Choosing clothes, I couldn't see the laser pointer in my lecture theaters. and right the way across to actually safety critical things. So due to the fact that I can't tell the difference between some red and green lights, I couldn't be an astronaut in this day and age, for example. I have my fingers crossed that, you know, in 30 years, I won't need to see color to be an astronaut, but for now I couldn't be if I wanted to. So the next few slides just indicate a little bit more of where I've actually experienced this. So this is a lecture theatre that I've spent hundreds of hours in the City and Guilds building. And every time we were doing some complex equations, the professor would, or the lecturer would more often than not use a red laser pointer to point out which terms were moving where. And I had to constantly poke the person on my left or right to ask them what they were talking about, because I didn't see the laser pointer, even if I sat all the way at the front of the class. This is a recent example of a schedule that I was that was used in the team that I work with, and I can't see the difference between the two colors that are circled, even though I've now been told that there is a difference, and that obviously caused some confusion when I asked why it does the activity start and then stop for 2 weeks and then come back into place later. So minor inconveniences, but you can obviously see how if you're setting an exam, which is supposed to, or especially using digital media to convey information using colors, that can significantly impede the experience for colorblind people. And finally, a safety critical example. Thank goodness I haven't actually had to do much wiring. I did do some for my degree, but it could be the case that you know, I would accidentally solder a green wire to a red wire or a blue one to a purple one, and that could cause, you know, significant damage or compromise my or someone else's safety. So there are, you know, some quite serious consequences, especially for the more severe forms of colorblindness. So I have a kind of mid-range, mild severity, but there are those who have it much more severe than I do, and they would have to be much more aware and careful about this kind of thing. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on how I deal with it. As I mentioned before, I do use context and brightness quite a bit, kind of subconsciously. So for example, if I'm shopping for a shirt and I see a shirt, I can't tell if it's purple or blue. It's more likely than not that it's going to be blue, given that it's in the men's section. But quite often I'll just ask for help because I'm not 100% sure, and I just need help. There are tools that are very useful, such as Image Color Picker online, which I use if I'm ever preparing a presentation or doing something like that where I need to find out what a color is and I can't tell. You can pick things from an image. Quite a few softwares have a colorblind mode. Things like video games have a colorblind mode, so I've used that throughout my upbringing to help a little bit. But I've also had to just accept that sometimes I'll get it wrong. For example, I wore a green shirt for 2 years thinking that it was gray. And when my flatmates let me in on the truth, I was pretty shocked. But you know, that just happens every once in a while. So just to finish with the final slide, what you can do about it, I would really encourage you to take a look at colorblindness among other, you know, things similar to it. So, you know, everything that Sarah was talking about, certainly just finding out more about it will help you be more aware of the effects that it has. And certainly given that it's such a prevalent condition, it's probably something that as educators we should be looking out for. You could take a test yourself, or someone for you or for someone who you suspect might be colorblind. As I said, there's a whole spectrum, so you might be very moderately colorblind and never noticed it. And you know, it's just an interesting test to take. It only takes about 3 minutes. And as educators, designing it with it and designing with colorblindness in mind. So for example, where possible, avoiding colors to convey information, or pairing that with another method. So for example, textures or symbols to convey the same information, choosing contrasting colors. And there are several tools online, including a colorblindness simulator, which is very useful and was used to generate the images that you saw. So you can put in an image and see what it's like to see that same image with different levels of colorblindness. And finally, if possible, using a bright green laser pointer, but ideally no pointer at all. So perhaps a cursor. I had a lecturer who used a pool cue, and they were one of my favorite lectures because I could actually keep up with what was going on. So Those are things that you could do as you know, as you go about your lives as educators. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions if you have any, either in the chat or in the conference cafe later. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you very much. I've no doubt you've raised all of our awareness on a number of issues around colour blindness that we simply weren't aware of previously. Finally, I'd like to ask Katie to present, and Katie's going to talk to us all about the issues of LGBTQ+ students in the new online environment that they'll encounter. You're muted, Katie.
Of course I was muted. I can't keep all of these things in my head. And again, from the top. I am Katie Stripe, Senior Learning Designer in Postgraduate Medicine, but most of you, I imagine, will know that. I've been at Imperial for nearly 10 years, and most of that time has been spent in different roles in postgraduate medicine. I did take a break to go to engineering for a while, but I didn't really like it, so I came straight back. Before I worked at Imperial, I worked at the University of Brighton and as an English language teacher in Prague. Before that, I was a student of geophysical sciences at the University of East Anglia, where I got a degree, just. And even further back than that, I went to an all-girls grammar school in rural Lincolnshire, which was a daily joy. Many of you in the audience will have heard me speak before and will know that I usually wing it a little bit. But in a break from tradition, today I have scripted myself, partly because I'm looking at a screen, partly so I don't waffle, but partly so I can share it with you. Like everyone else that's spoken today, I'm going to share some of my own experiences as a student and as a member of the Imperial College community. First, I'm going to tell you something that will not surprise many people. As a staff member at Imperial, this has never been a real issue. There is a great community here, particularly in medicine. However, I don't want the take-home message from my experience to be that Imperial is always open-minded and accepting. The message is I've been very lucky, and I cannot speak for the experience of others. Now I'm going to tell you something which you might find a bit more surprising. Now, I imagine that some of you are making assumptions that those two things are linked. They're not. My experiences on this front are less positive than those relating to my earlier revelation. I've definitely experienced people at Imperial that think I need looking after or somehow protecting. I really don't. I must also add, though, that there are some fantastically supportive people here who without a doubt have helped me through some tricky times. But once again, I cannot speak for everyone in our community. So why am I telling you this? First of all, because I can. I work in an environment where I feel supported enough to be able to make these statements without feeling like I'm being judged. I'm really lucky. Second, because I'm 37 years old, I've had a lot of therapy and I'm okay with it. And I know that if anyone has a problem with either of those things, that it is firmly their problem. However, that knowledge comes from experience, and I'm lucky. Here is the important thing. For me, being able to say I'm gay is a lot easier than admitting I suffer from depression. For many reasons that obviously require a lot more therapy to unpick. However, what I do know is that for me, going for university was the place where I started to unpick these things and deal with them. And I could do that because I was away from home. I was lucky. If you grow up gay, especially in rural Lincolnshire, you learn to read people, because if you say the wrong thing to the wrong person, it may not end well. As you grow up and move into employment, you keep learning that because the majority of people assume you're straight until they're told otherwise, this means effectively you have to come out to every single person you meet. It's exhausting. But what I have always been able to do is read people and know if I need to keep my mouth shut, because I've been lucky. The students and new staff members we are accepting into our community now are not as lucky as I have been. They may still be in a home environment where they cannot be out. They will not get the same physical interactions with others that I have had. They may be more isolated because the rules of social interaction have changed. We cannot know the situation of someone at the other end of a screen, especially if they're one of 50. And we have a duty to make sure that no one is even further marginalised, that they have a safe space to grow, as students, as scientists, as colleagues, and as people. You may be wondering why in a session that is about inclusion and accessibility, I chose to come out via the least accessible method possible. Everyone has a right to come out when and how they like and on their own terms. And I don't just mean that in terms of sexuality. I also know that some of you will have missed it because you were watching on a small screen, because you have a bad internet connection, or simply because you weren't paying attention. That's not a judgment, it's just how it is. But be aware what else you might miss and how important that piece of information might be to the person that was sharing it. Finally, I don't have the answers. I just know, like all the other speakers that we've heard from today, that these are things that we need to consider. And I know that I'm lucky, and if my sharing helps provide a better experience for our students and our colleagues, then that is a good thing. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Katie, very much for sharing your experiences there. And I think it's probably true to say, as you mentioned at the end, we don't have all the answers. We've shared some tips and advice and some guidance today to some of these issues, but it's about encouraging everybody to really consider these issues. And I hope everybody thinks that we've achieved that. That brings us to the end of this session. I think we've packed a lot in to a small amount of time, and I hope you agree with me that what we've heard will stimulate us to go away and think about these issues more deeply as we plan the online environments with our colleagues and for our students for next academic year. I'd like to end with just a brief reminder really about the remaining sessions for our conference. I hope very much that you'll join us just in a few moments at 3:05 for the Adapt and Thrive session. And then that will be followed just after 4 o'clock, the conference cafe session. And again, as I said, that is in the more traditional MS Teams format. So an ideal opportunity there for you to ask questions of both our presenters from this session and to those presenters who are talking in the next session. And then next week, day 2 of our conference is on Tuesday the 22nd. Our first session there, you'll see, is classroom updating now with remote control. And then the second session is about the development of academic identities, then followed by our final conference cafe. I have just posted in the Q&A facility a link back to the main conference web page. And from there, you'll be able to find links to all of those sessions. So I hope that's an easy way for you to access them. And that really just leaves me to thank our presenters very much for their time and for sharing their expertise and particularly sharing their experiences. And to all of you for taking your time to join us this afternoon. And I look forward to seeing you soon. My one final note is to say that we are very keen to hear your feedback. So there will be an evaluation form that's circulated, and that will be after day 2 of the conference. And we're only 3 minutes over time, so I'd like to thank everybody for that as well. Thank you all, and hopefully see you soon.